What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, and Waverly's here too. We're from Mtg. We like it at Magic, and the time is finally here. Sit back, relax, crack something open, and enjoy the top 25 cards in Core Set 2021. It was difficult to get this list down to 25, and I've actually got like 5 honorable mentions, but we'll get to those a little bit later in the video. As it is, I want to go ahead and start things off with number 25, Grim Tudor. Now, I've seen a lot of Billy and Mandy in my day, and I don't think Grim would be a very good tutor, but I guess appropriately, neither is this card, right? Perennial top 8 competitor Seth Manfield has already called this a bulk rare. I won't go that far, it is on my list, but mostly because it's a really high-priced commander card that now you can get without having to pay an arm and a leg in real life for it. I think it's going to be really nice for Commander players to have better access to this, and it does have some potential in Standard, and even beyond, where if a combo deck is focused around a really important 4-drop that you have to have every game, then maybe you play this on turn 3, but in a lot of situations, I don't think it's going to be worth skipping your turn 3 effectively and paying 3 life in order to get that 4-drop. But there might be a deck here or there where that's very much something you want to be doing. So I don't think Grim Tudor is the best card in the world, but I do think it deserves some recognition. But number 24 is Hot Rada, back looking better than ever, and that's not a comment on her figure either. She's still looking dummy thick, and I'll never complain about that. But the text box is what's got me hot on this thing. This is effectively a more aggressive Courser of Krufix, and I'll never sneeze at that. Rather than gaining you life, instead, this thing can swing with First Strike, which is always an undervalued ability, and if you have enough to pump into it, well, then suddenly it's easily the biggest creature on your side of the table. And again, swings with First Strike. That seems really nice to me. All at just the initial cost of 3 mana. A lot of cards in this format allow you to play extra lands every turn. That's going to look really good with Rada, and post-rotation. When Temur Ramp no longer has the ability to be a combo control deck, maybe it'll slant a little bit more aggressive, and then Rada will be right there for it. Rada not only has the Heart of Keld, she's got my heart too. Now, number 23 is Stormwing Entity, and it's appropriate this card has the word wing in its title because this is the blue cheese right here, y'all. I like this card an awful lot, and the blue-red spells decks really needed another cheap, efficient, low-costed, evasive threat to help push them over the line, and this card is all that, and it scries you into more good stuff when it enters the battlefield. If you can just opt or shock or really anything that costs 1 mana on your main phase and then throw this down for just 2 mana and you get yourself a 3/3 flyer, that is really, really nice, especially good for those decks like blue-red spells that'll sometimes be able to cast this and then hold up mana for counter spells and whatnot. It's just a nice big body that if you can keep it on the battlefield for a couple of turns, it'll deal 6, 9 damage and really help put your opponent away. Again, those decks really just needed one more efficient threat, and they've got it. But number 22 is Subira, the Baked Ziti Marinara. That's her name right there. This is another sweet-looking card post-rotation that might actually do some work pre-rotation in these mono red decks where I really don't see it being more than a 1 or a 2 of. But if you activate its second ability, very often you're not letting go of any actual cards because you're out of cards by then. So your 10th Street Dodgers that automatically get through regardless are going to start drawing you cards at that point. But you can also just make small stuff unblockable, so it's a form of reach in the late game if the game goes longer than you want it to. That's one thing I really like about this card, is that it's a good safeguard in the event that the game goes longer than turn 5 or 6 in your mono red deck. That's something you really don't want to happen, but this provides you not only reach, but the ability to draw into more gas. Those are things mono red really wants. Number 21 is 9 Lives, and I really want to put this card higher up on the list, if only because of the art, right? I want the art on this wall. The entire wall is this art. That would be very cool. But as far as the actual card goes, I don't like this as much as some people, but I do like it more than others, which is why it made the list in the first place. I think this might be a really, really good sideboard or even main deck option against decks like Temur Reclamation, because this makes they have to hit you with 9 explosions. Or maybe they just mill you out, right? Like, there are other ways for Expansion Explosion and Temur Reclamation to kill you, but this really does help, if nothing else, against those decks. It also keeps, like, Zenith Flare from killing you in one-shot, so any big fireball-type effects that just one-shot you, this will safeguard against, and there's a few important decks in the format that use those kinds of things to finish games off, so just by proxy, this is guaranteed to be a pretty decent card out of the sideboard and control deck. So it's got to be on the list somewhere, but at the same time, it's not going to help you against everything. Number 20 is Discontinuity, and there was a point where I was writing this list, and this card was way higher up than this, but I've done some thinking about it. In a 6-mana Time Walk to let your opponent untap all their stuff, it doesn't look great. And yeah, you can do cool stuff with like Chance for Glory to where you don't lose the game off of Chance for Glory. It seems okay, I guess. Maybe probably not actually that good, to be honest. Right. That's the thing about this card is that a lot of the stuff you do with it doesn't seem that good because in some ways this is just going to amount to like a 6-mana counter spell that also ends the turn, or it's going to amount to a 6-mana Time Walk that again lets them untap, which is not really much of a Time Walk when you think about it. So I just think that this card is seeing an awful lot of hype right now, but I don't know that it's going to live up to that hype once we actually get access to it. But that said, still on the list, because there's a lot of really powerful stuff you can do with this card, whether it's Time Walk or Counterspelling in the turn. I mean, these are powerful things, but 6 mana, a little bit steep for doing that stuff. So I'm just not sure that this is going to see as much play as maybe we're thinking it's going to right now. But that said, it's still made my list. It's probably going to see some place somewhere because it is a powerful effect. But number 19 is a card I'm more hyped about than a lot of people, and that's Karevik. Karevik's an awesome character, first of all. I've loved Karevik since Mirage. Played with your torch a lot, buddy. But the thing is, I don't think that people understand how awesome this static ability actually is. You ever resolve an Ethereal Absolution? It's very good against all your opponent's creatures. Even like the 2/2s this is good against. It might not kill them, but it does kneecap them at the very least, keep them from attacking. But there's lots and lots of X1 creatures, from Fervent Knight to Venerable Knight to Gutter Bones to lots and lots more stuff that this completely hobbles in this format, and they're very important cards to a lot of decks. There's other creatures this completely blanks, like Serrated Scorpion or Priest of Forgotten Gods. There's a lot that this card does right now. I'm not saying it's, I've already made this comparison, but I do want to bring back up Goblin Chainwhirler. This is effectively a Goblin Chainwhirler that just stays on the board. Rather than having this one-time effect, it's just a static ability, and it can block and take down like 4 toughness creatures too. So all of this is really, really sweet to me, and I think Karevik's a better card than a lot of people think it is. Number 18 is Heroic Intervention, for obvious reasons, right? It's almost boring to put this card on the list, but it's just such a good card that it has to be on the list somewhere. This will affect Standard, whether it's the mono green Stompy deck or even just a deck that splashes green and plays a mid-range or aggro strategy. Your Gruul decks will probably play this out of the sideboard, so as a sideboard option, the card looks freaking ridiculous, even in a format with Teferi, where you can't cast this at instant speed. It's a little bit devalued, yes, but I still think that it's going to be worth a sideboard slot in many, many decks, and especially when Teferi rotates out, this is going to see all of the play in green sideboards. And number 17 is a card that was originally in my top 10, but I've kind of talked myself out of thinking that Bazru's Lieutenant is in the top 10 cards in the set. But that said, I'm still really excited for this thing. It's amazing sweeper protection. Even if you just put the counter on it, then it's a 4-mana 4/5 with protection from multicolored and vigilance, and it leaves behind a thing. It just keeps giving. It keeps doing so much. And if you have any other creatures with +1/+1 counters on them, it's effectively like a luminous brood moth for creatures with +1/+1 counters. It feels that way. In some cases. I just really like this thing. I think that sweeper protection is something that's at a premium right now in a format with so many played sweepers. And even though this does cost 4 mana, which is a little bit expensive for mono white decks, I still think that it's more than worth it to play this thing, because it's going to keep a lot of power on the board for you, whether it gets spot removed or you get swept, and it's going to allow you to keep attacking. It feels like a mono white Anax to me, and that's a very powerful card to be compared with. If you're in that kind of company, I think you're a pretty freaking good card. Number 16 is Village Rites. I believe this is the only common on this list, but it definitely deserves to be here. 1 mana, draw 2. In decks, in this format, in Standard, where it's really not in any way a downside to have to sack a creature. For just 2 mana, you can claim the Firstborn, one of their guys, and then sack it to draw 2 cards. Removal, draw 2, that costs you 2 whole mana. Unbelievable play, but even decks like Mono Black Sacrifice can probably play this card to great effect. I just think it goes everywhere. It costs almost nothing. Even if you have to sacrifice your own creature to it, you're still more than happy to get rid of a Woe Strider token or Serrated Scorpion or Gutter Bones and get it right back. There's just so many cool things you can do with a Village Rites. 1 mana for 2 cards is always going to be worth it, but especially in a format chock full of all of the different powerful effects that we have to go along with this. Absolute slam dunk. This is easily one of the best cards in the set. And number 15 might be a bit of a shock, but it's Chandra, The 5-mana Chandra in this set I think is way better than a lot of people giving her credit for. And no, not every Planeswalker made this list, believe it or not. But Chandra absolutely does. This does so much. Once you untap with it in play, it effectively allows you to draw 3 cards a turn, which I shouldn't have to tell you that's powerful. That's extremely powerful. This also ticks up to do 2 different things. So the turn that you play her, you'll probably shock something. You might hit your opponent's face or blow up a small creature. Seems good. But you'll never actually tick this down until you get to the ultimate. And the ultimate will very often win you the game because you just go get like 2 shocks, 2 skewer the critics, and whatever else, a slaying fire, and you just finish them. You just win, right? It just looks unbelievable to me. Do note, by the way, that the turn that you ultimate, you'll also have all the mana that you have, and it's probably going to be untapped. So not only do you get the, 6 red mana, but you also have all your untapped mana too. So you go get any number of red instant and sorcery spells, yeah, you'll win off of what mana you have available to you. So the ultimate is incredible, and you're always ticking up towards it. This is also guaranteed damage every turn it's on the board because you at least get to shock your opponent's face. That's one thing, but in most cases, the quote draw 3 cards almost ability is going to be the one that you're going to be using pretty much every turn that you're able to untap with this on the battlefield. And if you can't win off of an extra 3 cards a turn, something's wrong. This card is really, really good. I don't know why you don't get that. Number 14 is Spark Hunter Masticore. For a while, this thing didn't spark my interest that much, but the more I think about it, the more obsessed I get with this card. First of all, the body is pretty decent. 3 mana for a 3/4 that any deck can play. Those are at least okay stats. It can just shoot down Teferis while also being completely immune to Teferis and Nissas and whatever else. As long as you've got mana to pump into it, you can quickly maul a Planeswalker off of the table really, really easily. And you can just attack into that Planeswalker with a decent body if that's what you want to do too. It might cost you a card, but you can turn that into an upside fairly easily if you got some reanimation spells, or maybe you pitch a Euro into your graveyard to cast this. There are all kinds of ways to turn that downside into a relative upside, and in the meantime, you've got a nice body for the cost that just eats Planeswalkers. Number 13 is Baron, and I have been fighting myself because I want to put this card in the top 10. I have the feeling that this card is easily one of the better cards in the entire set. Could be top 10 material, but there are some checks and balances on this. If the card itself had flash, I would easily say it's in the top 3 in the set, but it kind of hurts that it doesn't. You can, however, bounce stuff back to your hand to reset it. Planeswalkers are what I'm thinking there. But you can also bounce Omen of the Sea back to your hand, or any sort of saga that's on its 2nd chapter and it's about to go off. There's all kinds of things you can reset with this, and then draw a card, which is really important. You can return your own Brazen Borrower to your hands to reset that and use it again later, again drawing a card in the process. And if nothing else, this is just a mana war in some ways, right? A 3 mana 2/2 body that bounces something of theirs to get you a little bit of tempo when it enters the battlefield. So there's just so much versatility, and there's cards always going to have something to do, whether it's benefiting you by bouncing one of your own permanents or giving you some breathing room by bouncing one of your opponent's things. There's just so much for the card to do that it's guaranteed to see some amount of play. But my number 12 is the sad Robo himself, Solemn Simulacrum, old Psalm Sim himself. This is a really sweet card, and you probably don't need me to tell you that, but we all have our doubts whether or not the card is good enough for standard play. But I think it absolutely is, especially in some decks that really want it, like the Ugin deck. We've all been talking about whatever the best shell is for Ugin. Well, Ugin blows away everything that's 1 or more colors. Solemn Simulacrum is not 1 or more colors and helps ramp you into Ugin. And if it does die in the process, well, you've drawn a card and that gets you closer to your Ugin. So I think it goes really, really well in that deck. But just aside from the Ugin deck, this is still the perennial mid-range creature in Magic that puts a body on the board, ramps you, and gets you a card at some point in the game. It does everything mid-range decks wants to do at a pretty fair price, and I think it's destined to see play 10 years after the fact. Closer to 15 years after the fact, really, but my number 11 is another card that might actually really surprise you, but it's Chromatic Orrery, and this was almost on the sleepers list, just like Chandra was too, but also just like Chandra, this is a card that I think is actually too powerful to be on the sleepers list, and its power level should be self-evident. This is also evidence that I do care about you Commander players. That's why this card is effectively the honorable mention for the top 10. Not quite in the top 10, but I do think this is a very impactful card for your format from this set. But I do think it could see some standard play too. Standard players? I'm serious. We're already talking about ramping to 8 mana for Ugin, so why not ramp to 7 for Chromatic Orrery? I know Ugin is the much more important card to ramp to and all that, but still. If you can actually get this out, it only really costs you 2 mana, and suddenly it creates all of the mana in the world, and you can do whatever you want with it. But we're in the top 10 now, and number 10 is Liliana, the Wake and Baker. I don't know why this card is getting so much flack right now. It's a really, really good card, and almost everything that it does can affect the game in good ways. Play it on turn 4, you're probably ripping something important out of your opponent's hand. It's going to be relevant in a lot of matchups in the standard right now, but if your opponent doesn't have any cards in their hand, then you're kind of just dealing 3 damage a turn to them, and a bolt a turn on an uptick is actually really good and counts as a win condition in some cases. I like that, and I like the removal ability here too, because it's not restricted to like creature cards in your yard. It's just the number of cards in your yard, and it's not hard to get a few of those in there by turn 4 and easily, reliably take out a creature early in the game. But that's actually not where this card shines. This card shines the later into the game that it actually gets. You top deck this on turn 7 or 8 in your control deck, and suddenly you play this, and it's either dealing 3 a turn or it's killing a very large creature pretty reliably. So, again, the later that you go into the game, I think the better this Liliana gets, and it's going to shine in those more slow roll controller mid-range decks that want to get to turn 8 or 9 and just take over the game either by snowballing or having effects like this that work every single turn. Again, 3 damage a turn or a discarded card every turn is a lot better than you think it is, even if it costs you a card sometimes too. Really like this card. I like the ultimate on it as well. There's just not a single thing about this Liliana that I haven't talked myself into. I think this is a really good card. Now, number 9 is Sublime Epiphany. If I'm picking a 6-mana blue instant speed card from this set to put in the top 10, it is 100% Epiphany and not Discontinuity. I think this is a much better card in every way than Discontinuity, and as a matter of fact, considering you can't play all these 6-mana blue instants in the world in your deck, I think this is probably the card that's going to keep Discontinuity from seeing play, because everything that it does is a lot better. I'm not saying it's the same card or anything, but in some ways, Discontinuity is often just going to be an expensive counterspell that ends the turn. This is going to be an expensive counterspell that also copies one of your guys, bounces one of their permanents, and draws you a card, and that kind of value is on the same level as like Casualties of War, but at instant speed. This card is actually unbelievable, and it would not surprise me if blue-based control decks ended up putting 2 copies of these in their deck. I know 6 mana is really, really steep, but when it pops off in just 3 ways, it doesn't even have to copy one of your dudes, but when it does, then it's just doing this weird torrential Gearhulk impression. It's copying a big guy, countering a spell, drawing you a card, bouncing a thing. It's just going to be a really difficult card for your opponent to actually recover from, and it might just win games outright by itself. This is an unbelievable Magic card, and you need to take it seriously. But number 8 is Containment Priest, and this is proof that I care about Pioneer and Historic and stuff, because this is going to be an important card in those formats, as well as Standard. This would have been a lot better if the Companion rule hadn't changed, but it still helps them, stops them from escaping creatures and whatnot, and there's a whole bunch of other things that this does. They can't play creatures off of Light Up the Stage, Escape to the Wilds, a lot of other stuff, right? Containment Priest is going to be a really nice card out of the sideboard in not only Standard decks, but formats far beyond Standard. So even though I think it's probably just a sideboard card, it's probably the most important sideboard piece in the set. But number 7, further proof that I care about my EDH audience out there, we got Mangara, the Diplomat, and I would probably go ahead and pick these up because I don't think the price is going to dip low anytime soon. This is white card draw, mostly for the Commander environment, but this is probably the single best Commander card in the entire set. Period, because it gives white something that it's wanted for pretty much its entire existence. So I gotta give it a slot somewhere. This could actually see some Standard sideboard play, if nothing else, against somewhat aggressive decks or maybe spells or combo based decks, but where it really shines is Commander, where it doesn't even have to be your Commander. It's probably going to be in the 99 of every mono white deck from now until the literal end of time. So it's got to be on the list somewhere, and I think it deserves a top 10 slot, because this deserves, or it kind of signals a changing of the guard in terms of what white can actually do in EDH. It's going to be a very powerful card in that format from here on out. But number 6 is a card that I fully intended to be in the high teens when I started writing this list, but it slithered its way into the top 10 because I can't stop thinking about Conclave Mentor, y'all. I've done a lot of work in the lab with this card, and I think that it might actually allow Selesnya to compete for once, right? Bant's been a great color combination for the last couple of years, but you take away that blue, and suddenly Selesnya can't compete by itself. But Conclave Mentor might change all that now that Selesnya finally has its very own Winding Constrictor. We already know, thanks to history, that this card is pretty freaking sweet. You put it in the green-white color combination, and it can do even more because there's lots and lots of white cards that want to put +1/+1 counters on things. We've already looked at Basili's Lieutenant this video, but there's plenty of other stuff that Mentor works with. Oh, and by the way, it gains you a bunch of life when it dies, too. It's just, the card is pushed for standard pretty obviously, and will allow Selesnya and even Abzan and other color combinations to do some pretty wicked stuff. But number 5, Scavenging Ooze. Definitely Scoos. This makes a huge impression day one, I imagine. It can be main decked, too. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sideboard piece, but it can come out of the sideboard to eat up Cauldron Familiars and Euros out of the graveyard and plenty of other things your opponent might be trying to do. Are they playing Elspeth Conquers Death, trying to get that Teferi out of their yard? No, sir or madam, you can't do that at all. There's just so much that this, counterplays against very well in the format while growing huge in the process. I really like this card, and I think it can do a wide variety of things against a lot of decks. It has pretty much every time we've had access to it in Standard, and it's done plenty of work in Modern in the past to show it's got a really powerful pedigree that I expect it to live up to in this environment where graveyards are relatively important. But number 4, easily one of my favorite cards in the set. You might think it's a little bit too high up on the list, but I expect truly great things from Nyambi, the esteemed speaker. Earlier I gave the example of Baron returning a Brazen Borrower to your hand. Well, alongside Brazen Borrower, Nyambi's an even better play, because for just 2 mana, you get to return that Brazen Borrower back to your hand, gain 3 life, and then cast it again to bounce something. Beautiful card, all at instant speed. The flash is key on this because it can save one of your creatures, gain you a bunch of life, and reset and enter the battlefield trigger, like Elite Guard Mage, for instance, or Deputy of Detention even. There's a lot of stuff that this card does. 2 mana to save one of your creatures is amazing, but even if you're not necessarily saving your creatures, let's go back to Brazen Borrower for a second. Let's say they're swinging in with a flyer. Well, you can block with your Borrower, play Nyambi, pop the Borrower back to your hand. The creature you blocked is considered blocked. It ain't doing no damage. You can just recast your Brazen Borrower. It was just a crazy play. All of that would cost you a total of 4 mana if you wanted to recast the Brazen Borrower. It's just an unbelievably cheap, effective card that does an awful lot of things, whether it's saving a creature or resetting an ability for you, and it gains you life at the same time. It just does so much, and by the way, puts a body on the battlefield too. I just don't see too many bad situations for this card. It does just about everything you want it to do. But before we get into the top 3, let's talk a little bit about some honorable mentions here, like Elder Gargaroth and Baneslayer Angel. Gargaroth would be on this list if it did literally anything when it entered the battlefield or generated value for you in some way before you untapped, right? But as it is, if you can untap with this on the battlefield and start attacking with it, it's going to deal a lot of damage and generate a lot of value in the form of life or cards or whatever, making creatures. It's just a really powerful looking card, but you have to be able to actually swing with it, and that's where the problem comes in. So I'm not too sure about it. Same thing's true of Baneslayer Angel. It ain't 2011 anymore, and this card doesn't generate value for you the turn it enters the battlefield, so that's kind of a strike against it. But it's so unbelievably good against decks like Mono Red that I think it's probably got a huge chance of seeing at the very least sideboard play, but probably not going to be the card it used to be. I really like Rin and Siri as well, or Rin and Stimpy, I guess we're calling this thing, but I like this, especially as a payoff for what little dogs we actually have in Standard right now, because if you have like 3-4 dogs out and you can effectively tap this for 3 or 4 damage every turn, guaranteed, I actually think it's doing really cool stuff for you, but I obviously don't think the Dogs deck is all the way there in Standard right now, or the Cats deck for that matter, and it's got even more support. I also really like Archfiend's Vessel, but I could not find a spot on the list for this card. It goes really well with stuff like Call of the Death Dweller and whatnot, but at the end of the day, this might end up being either slightly too cute or freaking incredible. We'll have to wait and see, but I do want you to know that on a subjective level, it's one of my personal favorite cards in the set. But we're in the top 3, everyone, and number 3 is Conspicuous Snoop. This might not actually do anything in Standard, right? But it works so well alongside Kiki Jiki and other formats that it's got to be on this list, because at the very least it forms pretty much an infinite combo if Kiki Chiki's on top of your library. So that's I like that about it. But even in Standard, there are plenty of goblins that you can effectively make this like a 2-mana experimental frenzy. And if it stays out for more than a turn or two, it's just generating tons and tons of unbelievable board presence and value for you. So even in Standard, I like this card. But honestly, the farther you go back in formats, the better the card gets, and it's a form of card advantage that goblins could only have previously ever hoped or wished for. They finally got it. This kind of card advantage actually looks filthy in goblins, and kind of like a possibly one step over the line. So I'm just amazed that goblins got a piece like this in the first place. But even though Standard is probably the worst format you could be playing this in, I'm going to try to do it. But number 2 is actually Teferi, Master of Time. I'm just as surprised as you are. I really did not expect this card to be in the top 3, much less number 2, but here we are. The more I think about it, the more I really like this card. I think that the ability to tick up or tick at all during your opponent's turn is actually a huge deal and will have much more sort of implications than we currently think that it does. Being able to tick not only on your turn, you can do it twice a turn cycle. Tick on your turn and your opponent's turn is going to be either supremely annoying or very controlling, or both. It turns out it's usually one and the same, right? So I just think that even if you end up playing this on turn 4, ticking it up, and then ticking it up again before it actually gets mowed down, you still kind of gain some life because you diverted your opponent's attack step to your Planeswalker. And you drew a couple of cards. You had to discard, but you still got access to a couple of cards there. So even like the fail cases on this, where it doesn't get to do everything you want it to do, are still actually kind of decent cases. So I like this an awful lot. I think a lot of the control decks in this format tap out anyway right now. You tap out on turn 3 for Teferi. You tap out on turn 4 for a 4-drop. You tap out on turn 5 for Elspeth Conquers Death. So, you sort of draw a go. I'm never going to tap anything during my turn control decks aren't really a thing right now. So I think this kind of goes into the modern day tap out blue-white control decks anyway, and is just immediately one of the better cards in the entire deck. Seriously. So I think this card is definitely going places in Standard, if not other formats, and might be the single most playable Commander Planeswalker of all time. So it's got that going for it too. This card is a lot better than a lot of players think, because ticking up on your opponent's turns is nasty. But number 1, we're finally here, and you probably sussed it out by now, because Ugin's not going to not be on the list. Right? Ugin the Spirit Dragon is the card that's got everyone talking, and a lot of people are saying that in the early days of the format, it's all about who can build the best shell for Ugin, because Ugin is going to be an important card, turns out. Right? If you can actually resolve this, it's going to blow away everything, whether it's small aggro creatures, mid-range stuff, planeswalkers like Elspeth. I was going to say Elspeth Conquers Death, but it will blow away Elspeth Conquers Death. It'll blow away Teferis, and other 4 and 5 mana planeswalkers that you might be worried about in this format. It just does everything the turn that it comes down, resets the board almost entirely, except for any colorless stuff you might have, Ugin included. But in the meantime, it can also just bolt them every turn. Kill their small creatures every turn by ticking up, eventually win the game with lightning strike damage every turn. There's just so much that Ugin does, and I think it's actually even better than it was last time we had it in Standard, because we've got an even better ramp right now than we had last time. And last time this was in Standard, it saw a fair amount of play. I think it's destined to see even more than that this time around, because the ramp is so ridiculous. But I think we made it, everyone. The top 25 Core Set 2021 cards, and there were a bunch of cards that I really liked that I didn't even get to mention. But if you didn't see something that you really like and you want to talk about it, get at me down there in the comments section. Let me know. And check out the top 10 Sleepers video. I do make an error. I probably should have read Chandra's Pyroling before I made this video. I did read it, but I guess I should have read it again. But in any case, aside from that one card, I think this a really good list video over here. So if you didn't see your favorite cards in this video, check out that video. They might have made that list. But aside from that, just like the video, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Deck Techs coming up very soon, and it appears as though the patrons have chosen Ugin Ramp as the first deck of the season anyway. So you'll get to see that super soon. If you're interested, check it out. And if you want to join up the Patreon, it's just $1 a month to vote on what decks you want to see this season. So get in there and do that. And don't forget to tell me what your favorite Course 2021 cards is. Anyway, I'm done for this one, so I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.